of little Arthur Hughes, Germany's proposed vaccine mandate, and the by-election victory for the Tories. But first, here's the news with Rihanna.
I'm Rhiannon Jones. This is your news at 3 o'clock. The stepmother of Arthur Labinjo Hughes has been jailed for life for the 6-year-old's murder. 32-year-old Emma Tustin will serve a minimum of 29 years in prison for starving, poisoning and then killing the little boy in June 2020. Tustin refused to enter the dock for the judge's sentencing. Arthur's father, 29-year-old Thomas Hughes, was sentenced to 21 years for manslaughter. The World Health Organization have warned that the Omicron variant is very transmissible, but urged people not to panic. The WHO chief scientist said the majority of cases they'd investigated saw mild symptoms, but it's too early to rule that it's a weaker strain.
It's possible that the Omicron variant is able to overcome and cause infections even in previously vaccinated people. We are seeing that now with a lot of previously vaccinated people who are the first few to be reported with Omicron. However, the fact that they're not getting sick, and again, we have to wait and see, but if they develop only mild illness, that means that the vaccines are still providing protection.
Meanwhile, a new study has found that the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines give the best overall booster against COVID-19. It found that those two jabs led to the most significant rise in immunity levels. Omicron wasn't tested in the trial, but experts say immunity could mean that boosters offer good protection against the new variant. One of the UK's most senior counter-terrorism officers has told GBNews the public could play a vital role in preventing another terror attack. Scotland Yard's Deputy Assistant Commissioner Matt Twist is urging the public to be extra vigilant in the run-up to Christmas, but he says people shouldn't change their plans. After 2 attacks in a month, enhanced police patrols will be operating in town and city centres over the festive period.
I mean, this is the first Christmas in a couple of years where lots of people are going to be together. There's lots of big events going on, and we want people to go and enjoy them. But we also know that the terrorist threat level has been raised to severe after the 2 awful attacks we've seen, one in Essex and one in Liverpool. And we just want the public to be vigilant. We mean that severe means an attack is highly likely, but it doesn't mean they shouldn't go about carrying on their normal business. What it means is that if you're worried about something, if you're suspicious about something, then tell us about it.
The Met Police says it is deeply sorry so many people faced unacceptable scenes of disorder after a damning report described the Euro 2020 final as a day of national shame. The independent review commissioned by the FA found there'd been a collective failure by all organisations involved in planning for the final. Around 2,000 ticketless fans forced their way into the National Stadium. The energy regulator Ofgem has removed the compensation cap, allowing customers to claim up to £140 for every day they've been without power following Storm Arwen. A week on, over 10,000 people are still without electricity in parts of Scotland and the north of England. The industry watchdog is also launching an urgent review into the response of energy network companies in the wake of the storm. Retailers are making shocking and completely unjustified profits from fuel prices. That's according to a report. Motoring organisation, the RAC, says a fall in oil prices is not being reflected at the pumps, with major supermarket chains among the biggest offenders. Despite the wholesale price of petrol falling by 10 pence in November, forecourt prices increased to a record high of almost £1.50 per litre. Long-serving Director of Cricket Martin Moxon, head coach Andrew Gale and the entire coaching team have left Yorkshire Cricket Club. It follows an investigation into claims by Azim Rafiq that he suffered racist abuse while at Yorkshire. Yorkshire Chair Lord Patel says significant change is required at the club to regain trust. Hundreds of thousands of people are suffering post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of the pandemic, a report has found. New data from the Royal College of Psychiatrists estimates there could be more than 200,000 cases across the UK following the pandemic. Experts say symptoms of PTSD include irritability, anxiety and dissociation, a feeling of being disconnected or numb. The report highlighted a particular concern for frontline healthcare staff and patients hospitalised with severe COVID symptoms. And I'll be back with the latest headlines in half an hour, but for now let's return to Arlene and the briefing.
Hello and welcome to the briefing, your afternoon fix of all the latest political news, debate and analysis. I'm Arlene Foster and here's what's coming up over the next hour. I'll speak to the Chair of Parliament's all-party group on child protection about the horrendous murder of a 6-year-old by his stepmom. She's just been handed 29 years, and we'll ask why were so many kids put in increased danger during lockdown. Germany's new left-leaning government, meanwhile, is moving towards mandatory vaccines and locking down the unvaccinated. We'll get the latest on that from Berlin. And the Tories have a new MP, Louis French, after the by-election in South London was elected this morning, but just 35% turned out to vote. I'll speak to a polling expert about what this all means. So give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at GBNews. The brutal abuse and murder of little Arthur Laminja Hughes has shocked the nation. How could a stepmother murder a 6-year-old in her care? And how could a father stand by and even encourage the torturous treatment of one so young and so innocent? The Children's Commissioner for England, Anne Longfield, said this morning that the abuse was possible because vulnerable children slipped from view during the pandemic. Arthur then was perhaps just another of lockdown's many unseen victims. So what should the political response be? I'm delighted that Tim Lawton, the former Children's and Family Minister and Chair of the APPG on Child Protection, is with us to talk about this tragic murder. Tim, thank you so much for joining us. And first of all, I'll get your reaction to the sentencing of these two people, 29 years for the stepmother, 21 for the father. What's your assessment of those sentences this afternoon?
Well, I think most people would say they should be locked away and the key thrown away as well. They're most of the horrendous crimes that they've committed. It's not just murder, it's the torture and abuse inflicted systematically on that poor child over an extended time. So I think many people will be very pleased to see these two out of circulation. But there are many questions to be asked, and we need to hear from the serious case review, which is underway now, how this happened, and not just on the performance of individuals, but why did the system allow this vulnerable 6-year-old to die in the terrible way that he did?
Yeah, and I mean, unfortunately, Tim, we've been here before with the horrendous murder of Victoria Clumby in 2000. And of course, who could forget the innocent little face as well of baby Peter Connolly, and that was back in 2007. And yet here we are again. We have a child, as you rightly say, tortured, poisoned, starved, and then brutally murdered in the most horrific way. How did we, as a society, allow this to happen?
So you've mentioned just a few of the cases that went before, and there's Daniel Pelker and Aisha Smith and all sorts of others that could be added to it. Unfortunately, they are just the few that you hear about. When I was Children's Minister, the first meeting I had every week would be to go through the latest serious child abuse and child killing cases. And of course, it was only very few of those that hit the headlines, as is this case. This still goes on. And I'm afraid, I think in many respects, Arlene, that we've had much higher profile on child sexual exploitation, particularly since Jimmy Savile and the whole grooming gangs issues, which is good. But I think we've almost taken our eyes off the fact that this more conventional and horrific child abuse, usually at the hands of parents and carers, is still going on. And as a society, we've got to do more about it. And it needs a much better joined-up approach. I'm afraid it does need more funding. There's been a lot of focus on adult social care, where we need to do lots of things to help older people in later life. But children's social care has not been getting that same focus. And we've now got a lot of vulnerable children and families. We've now got a recent record number, over 80,000 in the care system. And there's not enough money to go round for that increased demand, although the funding has been going up. So we've got to look at this holistically. Why was it that various things didn't happen, which should have happened, which we could have identified in the case of Victoria Klimbo, Baby P, and all those others, and are still not happening in this system, despite the best intentions of many reports and reviews and acts of Parliament over many years? We still have a problem.
We do indeed, and I simply mention those two horrific cases, and you're right to say there are many others as well, because of course at those times we were talking about this can't happen again and never again can we have this. But I think listening, and my goodness, when I think of the jurors having to listen to the detail of the horrendous abuse that this child went through for the jurors had to listen for 9 weeks to all of this. I'm sure none of us would have liked to have sat through all of that. But the prosecutor said that this child had a bruise for every day of lockdown. And I want to take your view on lockdown. I mean, I remember discussing the impact of domestic violence on women and girls in lockdown, but children are also so vulnerable during a lockdown situation because this child wasn't at school. So there was no outside agency that the child went to every day so that they could see changes in him. And, you know, we'll talk about the other failures, but lockdown certainly did contribute to this child's death.
You're absolutely right, although I fear, given the severity of the cruelty inflicted on this child, I think even without lockdown, then this child was destined to meet a ghastly end if those parents had not been stopped. So we've heard from the NSPCC that during lockdown, their calls on child safeguarding matters went up by 23%. We know from local authorities that there's been an increase in child safeguarding cases during that period, and we certainly know there's been an increase in domestic violence during that period. And so often domestic violence and child abuse are linked. And I fear what happened, and we've absolutely got to avoid going back to this, is many social workers, for understandable reasons, didn't go knock on door and see people face to face, as is so important. They had to do virtual visits because of the pandemic. And if you've got somebody like Emma Tustin, who is very manipulative, very plausible, clearly very smart, then if you're doing a video conference with somebody, then she can show you what she wants you to see. Whereas a social worker who goes into a house can see that child in the bare flesh, literally, can look in the fridge to see what food there is the child being fed properly, can get a feel for something going wrong, and can literally eyeball those potential abusers and then use their professional judgment to see whether there is something amiss and an intervention needs to be happening, and perhaps that child needs to be taken into care. And of course, in lockdown, that just really didn't happen. So this just shows how important it is, where you've got kids who, when they are off the radar, then all this abuse can be happening behind closed doors. And we mustn't go back to that. The social worker's job is so important. They are really stretched at the moment. I often refer to them as the fourth emergency service, but they do their work best by being face-to-face with the people they're there to investigate and the children to protect.
And I have no doubt that that is the case, and they do some tremendous work, but I think lockdown had a hugely detrimental impact upon their work, as you've rightly said. But in terms of some of the triggers that were there, Tim, I mean, the grandparents were raising issues. An uncle raised an issue and was actually threatened with arrest if he broke lockdown rules. I mean, this is so distressing to hear that this was going on, that people were raising issues, and unfortunately this child was missed. It really is a terrible systematic breakdown.
It is, and again, I'm afraid that is all too familiar, Arlene, in other cases where certain people do raise the alarm. And it's not as though this child was just not on the radar. So the police had notice of it. Various other family members from quite a difficult family had raised this as well, and social services were aware, and there had been visits by social workers. Now, what so often happens in this case, I mean, safeguarding cases are really complicated. You have to be a sort of a detective, you have to be a psychiatrist, and you have to piece the various parts of a jigsaw together to get a full picture. And then crucially, somebody, a senior social worker or whoever, has to pick up the ball, has to take responsibility, and then take the lead. And that means knocking on doors, asking really awkward, difficult questions, and keeping at it until you are satisfied that actually that child is really safe, or that child needs to be taken into care, into a place of safety. And I'm afraid when you haven't got those various agencies in a joined up way, and they should be working that way, the system has been changed, they can work in that way, then these vital bits of information fall through the gaps. We did two things. When I was Children's Minister back in 2010, we launched the Monroe Review, which is a really important overhaul of the way social workers do safeguarding, because they were spending something like 80% of their time in front of computers, filling in lots of bureaucratic forms, complete nonsense. We freed up a lot more of their time, got rid of a lot of those very unnecessary rules, in fact, so that they could use their professional judgment to get into those houses face to face and make those vital judgments based on their professional expertise. That was really important. The second thing we did was to make serious case reviews, which is what's going to happen here, published and transparent. Before my time, they were kept secret. These are vital documents to learn exactly what went on. But the question it comes back to is the question you opened with. It's not just down to an individual or two who may have made the wrong decision. How did the system collectively allow such a terrible tragedy to happen, and allow these monsters to get away with it? And that's the learning we've got to take away from this, because I'm afraid little Arthurs will always happen. We are never going to get rid of evil people who, for whatever reason, want to abuse children, but we've got to make the opportunities for them to do that much harder.
Well, Tim, thank you so much for coming on. It's awful that we have to discuss this, and a terrible indictment on, as you say, the system, but also us as a society, that this is happening in modern United Kingdom. So thank you for coming on to discuss this awful story with me this afternoon. So we're going to move on now to talk about Germany, and vaccination could become mandatory there from February. Angela Merkel has said, as she is leaving, her successor as Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, agreed, describing the policy as a lockdown of the unvaccinated. According to Mrs. Merkel, the policy is an act of national solidarity. Is it? The move would follow the example of neighbouring Austria, which is planning mandatory vaccinations from February. Greece has also announced mandatory jabs for the over 60s, with unvaccinated people facing punitive recurring fines if they fail to comply. I'm glad to say joining me now to discuss this further is German correspondent Thomas Sparrow, who is in Berlin. And of course, Thomas, you had a change last evening. Mrs. Merkel is gone after 16 years. You have a new government in place. What do you make of what they're saying as some of their first acts?
The government is still not officially in place. That will happen on Wednesday. What actually happened here on Thursday was the official farewell ceremony for Angela Merkel, but she will remain in power until Wednesday, when the change of government will officially take place in the parliament. And in fact, the current government under Angela Merkel and the next government under Olaf Scholz, who is actually the vice chancellor now, they have said that they would like mandatory vaccinations in Germany, but that is a decision that will ultimately have to be decided by the parliament in a vote of conscience, so not under party lines, and that they would like that to happen as soon as possible. It can happen in February. That can start in February. You mentioned that, Arlene, in your introduction. Why in February? Because they want to wait for certain things to happen. Among them, a very important aspect, a study by the ethics department here in Germany, by the ethics commission, to try and really understand until what extent this can really be implemented, a mandatory vaccination on COVID-19.
And so at the moment, yes, that's coming in February and probably will be one of the first pieces of legislation in the new regime and the new government. But we already have this mandatory lockdown of the unvaccinated. What does that look like? How does that impact everyday life in Germany, Thomas?
Well, it doesn't look like some of the previous lockdowns. It has been described here as a sort of de facto lockdown for the unvaccinated. What it basically means is that only people who are vaccinated or who have recovered from the coronavirus will be able to take part in public life by, for example, going to a pub or going to a restaurant or going to a cultural venue. The unvaccinated will also have restricted contact possibility, so they will only be able to meet with a certain number of people, but they will still be able to go on public transport or go to the workplace, provided they can hand a negative coronavirus test. So it is not a lockdown where they have to stay at home all the time, as we saw in other cases. It is a lockdown where they won't be able to take part in public life. The reason behind that, according to officials here, is that Germany's vaccination rollout, Germany's vaccination rate is low compared to other Western European countries. And they have already seen here in Germany, as they already saw in Austria as well, that by implementing certain restrictions on the unvaccinated, they can increase the rate of those who go and take a vaccination. So we've seen days here in Germany where over 100,000 people a day have their first jab. And that's not included what other people also do with their second jabs or their booster jabs. So certainly authorities here have seen that by having these restrictions, they can increase the number of people who accept a vaccination offer.
Just very briefly, Thomas, because we're coming up to the break, unfortunately, but can you just explain to us what opposition that is facing in Germany at the present time, or are people content to go along with what the government have decided?
There is certainly a segment of the population that's very critical of this because they believe that it's ultimately a personal decision whether to get vaccinated or not. But what's interesting is that recent polls have revealed that a majority of Germans, in fact, a new poll said that 71% of Germans actually favor mandatory vaccinations. So it's also interesting to see how that has developed in the last few weeks and months, because a few months ago, that was a very different value. But now a majority of Germans certainly favor mandatory vaccinations to deal with the fourth wave of the coronavirus pandemic.
Well, Thomas, thank you, and interesting as always to hear from you on the ground in Germany, so thank you for joining us. So after the break, why did the Tories do better than many expected in yesterday's by-election, despite sleaze and lobbying scandals? I'll speak to one leading polling expert, but before that, let's take a look at the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello, rather changeable conditions this weekend. There will be outbreaks of rain at times for just about all of us at some point. However, it does tend to turn drier and brighter for most on Sunday, if feeling on the chilly side. Now back to the here and now, a number of weather fronts skirting across southern counties of England. Meanwhile, this weather front waiting in the wings will bring a thicker cloud and outbreaks of showery rain in from the northwest. This may well give some sleet or snow over the higher ground of the north. All in all, quite a lot of cloud around overnight tonight, and that will help keep temperatures up, at least not falling too low. We could just see a touch of frost in more rural parts of the west, where we do see clearing skies towards the end of the night. So a little bit of a chilly start for some tomorrow, but not as cold as some recent mornings. However, as the wind starts to become brisker through the course of the day, it will feel decidedly chilly, even where we do get a glimpse of sunshine. There will be a good deal of cloud around throughout the day on Saturday, a little bit of sunshine here and there, but further outbreaks of showery rain, and again some of that will be on the wintry side, particularly over higher ground. Now, as we head through Saturday evening and overnight, this showery rain continues to track its way eastwards, not clearing the east completely. Further showery outbreaks here, but elsewhere tending to turn drier as the night wears on. So it will be a dry, a bright, but a chilly start to the day for some on Sunday morning, particularly across more northern and western parts of the country. So as we start the day on Sunday, still a good deal of cloud across central and eastern areas, still some showers feeding through on that brisk north to northwesterly wind, but there will be brighter skies elsewhere, which will spread to most parts by the end of the day. So Sunday for most looking like the better day of the weekend for getting out and about, but turning unsettled again into next week with some very windy conditions on Tuesday.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hi, I'm Alistair Stewart, and I really hope that you can join me here on GB News. I've been in this game for 40 years and I've made lots of friends, and I try and reflect what they think about the big stories of the day in conversation with me. That's why we call it Alistair Stewart and Friends, and you're a key part of it as well. I always get inundated with emails and messages and texts, and if they're really good, I play them back to you. 12 till 3 every Saturday and Sunday.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage. I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
And welcome back to the briefing. So the Conservative Party have held the constituency of Old Bexley and Sidcup. Louis French, who was a local councillor, won with 51.48% of the vote. But the thing that I really noticed was the very low turnout. The by-election was, of course, prompted by the death of MP and former Cabinet Minister James Brokenshire, who died from lung cancer at the very young age of 53 back in October. James Johnson, who's the co-founder at JL Partners, joins me now to talk about the Old Bexley and Sidcup by-election result and to tell us what to make of all these statistics. And as you will well know, plenty of people making a lot of all of the statistics and what's happening. But I have to say, coming from the west of Northern Ireland, where we frequently see turnout of over 70%, the turnout was incredibly low, was it not?
It certainly was. It was a low turnout for this by-election. It tends to be the case in safer seats in by-elections. In 2014, there were an array of by-elections in very safe Labour seats, and you really did see incredibly low turnout. It's hard to know exactly who that benefits. I think, all put together, if we see a similarly low turnout next week in North Shropshire, which is another by-election taking place, a little bit more dangerous for the Conservatives, I'd expect to see a lower turnout, probably helping the Lib Dems rather than the Conservatives, just because, if you're someone trying to vote somebody out, you're more likely to turn out than somebody who's voting to keep somebody in.
I suppose everybody's trying to claim something out of this election, and we've heard from the Reform Party saying that they had a great election because they're now third and they beat the Lib Dems and the Greens, and there was a 10% swing to Labour. But in a by-election such as this against a government party, Would you expect to see a larger shift away from the incumbent?
Yeah, so this was a 10.3% swing away from the Conservatives. Now, that might sound quite significant, but actually the average in governing party defences in by-elections going back to 1997 is actually 16 points. So it's a little bit of a smaller swing away from the Conservatives than we've perhaps seen historically. It's much smaller than the swing that we saw in Chesham-Amersham earlier this year. So overall, I think that's probably an okay result for the Conservatives. I expect they'll broadly be content with that. We saw bigger swings against the governing party in the 2010 to 2015 parliamentary term, and obviously David Cameron ended up eventually winning that election in 2015. So I don't think there's anything here necessarily to spook the Conservatives too much. At the same time, it was not a bad result for Labour. What's very clear is that sort of era of by-elections that we saw earlier this year in the midst of the vaccine rollout, Hartlepool, big Conservative win. Batley and Spen, a swing towards the Conservatives. They didn't quite take it, but a good result for them. It seems like those days are over, and we're back to a more traditional by-election setting, Labour making some inroads, but perhaps not quite enough to really seem to signify a big threat for the next election just yet.
And what did you make of Richard Tice's performance for the Reform Party? He's making a lot of it by the fact that he's beaten both the Lib Dems and the Greens. Is that something you were expecting?
It was a little bit higher than I was expecting, I have to say. He kept his deposit. He got more than 1,000 votes in that seat, which, considering the low turnout, was relatively significant in percentage terms. Yeah, I think it is significant, and I think that it shows that there is an appetite for a party like that out there. Actually, he's not that well known nationally, Richard Tice. If this gives him a bit of a boost, if he's able to get his message out there a bit more, you could see that being a problem for the Conservatives in a general election. It's worth saying, of course, that the Brexit Party at the last election did hold back some Conservative advances in some of those Northern and Midland seats that voted Leave. If we see a Reform Party putting in the same amount of the vote as the Brexit Party did last time, or even a bit more, capitalising on issues like culture, capitalising on issues like immigration, then you could actually see that being a real problem for the Conservatives at the next election too. Not just the Conservatives, though. Remember, these parties do take votes from Labour as well. And the real advantage that Labour have in the seats that they lost last time is that a lot of those voters previously voted Labour. If that sort of tie is severed and they go over to the Reform UK and Richard Tice instead, then it's going to be harder for Labour to get those voters back too.
Yeah, and just finally, of course, you've mentioned that there's another by-election coming up as well. Do you think that'll be a different story, or will the Conservatives hold on there as well?
So it seems like it's the Lib Dems that are going to be the real challenger in that seat next week. And if you look at the by-election swings in the last few years, it is the ones that have the Lib Dems as the main challenger that tend to see a bigger swing away from the Conservatives. I think that's because voters aren't really thinking about the Lib Dems forming a government. They're not really worrying about the brand issues like Labour has. So, yeah, I think we are likely to see a bigger swing than the 10 points we saw last night. They could even go on to gain the seat. It's really hard to tell. It's a seat that doesn't have a lot of intel on it because it's been a safe Conservative seat for so long. So let's keep an eye on it. I'm not sure whether it will be a Lib Dem gain just yet, but I think I'd certainly expect a bigger swing than we saw last night.
Well, no doubt we'll be talking to you again, James, and after the by-election, maybe even next week. But after the break, we'll be speaking to Simon Calder, the well-known travel expert, on how will COVID impact our Christmas travelling and where the best Christmas destinations are. But first, here's Rhiannon with your news headlines.
I'm Rhiannon Jones. Here are the latest headlines. The stepmother of Arthur Labinjo Hughes has been jailed for life for the 6-year-old's murder. 32-year-old Emma Tustin will serve a minimum of 29 years in prison for starving, poisoning and then killing the little boy in June 2020. Arthur's father, 29-year-old Thomas Hughes, was sentenced to 21 years for manslaughter. Mr Justice Mark Wall QC said it was without doubt one of the most distressing and disturbing cases he'd ever had to deal with. Wales has confirmed its first case of the Omicron COVID variant. That's according to the Cardiff and Vale University Health Board. It comes as World Health Organization has warned that the Omicron variant's very transmissible, but urged people not to panic. Speaking earlier, the WHO chief scientist said the majority of cases they'd investigated saw mild symptoms, but it's too early to rule it a weaker strain. One of the UK's most senior counter-terrorism officers has told GB News the public could play a vital role in preventing another terror attack. Scotland Yard's Deputy Assistant Commissioner Matt Twist is urging the public to be extra vigilant in the run-up to Christmas. After 2 attacks in a month, enhanced police patrols will be operating in town and city centres over the festive period. The Met Police says it's deeply sorry so many people faced unacceptable scenes of disorder after a damning report described the Euro 2020 final as a day of national shame. The independent review commissioned by the FA found there'd been a collective failure by all organisations involved in planning for the final. Around 2,000 ticketless fans forced their way into the National Stadium. We'll have a full update for you at the top of the hour. See you then.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back to the briefing with me, Arlene Foster. The government has assured us that Christmas will not be cancelled. Well, the Prime Minister said the same thing around this time last year. On the 16th of December, he said it would be inhumane to cancel Christmas. And then, of course, we all know what happened. Anyway, to discuss some of our Christmas travel restrictions, which we hope will not be great, I'm joined now by Simon Calder, who is in Florida, I believe. So, Simon, perhaps you could tell us how your journey has gone so far.
Right, that's a really good point, Arlene. I'm here at the beautiful Kennedy Space Center, which, if anybody knows it, it's about an hour just east of Orlando, of course, huge theme park. But this has everything you could possibly want to prepare you for a journey into space. And it's been absolutely marvellous talking to all the Brits I've been meeting. Of course, it's not even a month since the US reopened, but it is very much back in action, whether you're at a great tourist attraction like this, on a fly drive, or indeed going into the big cities, although it's crucial to know that the rules depend on the state you are in. And you have, of course, at all times to respect all the various protocols. But in terms of getting here, well, it was simply a matter of getting a lateral flow test. I'm lucky enough to be fully vaccinated, show your certificate, show your test result. The only tightening up which is happening due to the Omicron variant is actually taking place on Monday. From then, you'll need to take the test either the day before you travel or on the day you travel. That's tightening up just a little bit. But honestly, as you can slightly imagine, there are many worse places that I could be right now than lovely sunny Florida.
So here's me thinking I was going to be talking to you about planet Earth travel, and you've taken it up a notch, Simon, to talk about space travel this afternoon. But I suppose a lot of people will be concerned at the restrictions changing before Christmas. We know a lot of people move about at Christmas time internationally, but also across the common travel area. Do you think there's going to be any restrictions in relation to that?
Well, look, and that is absolutely critical. Just a reminder, the common travel area is the 4 nations of the United Kingdom, plus the Channel Islands, the Isle of Man, and of course the Republic of Ireland. And actually coming into the UK from the Republic of Ireland, there's never been any testing or quarantine rules. It's been slightly different if you were going out to the Isle of Man, to the Channel Islands, to the Republic. Rules have been intermittent there, but I'm fairly hopeful that we will be able to look forward to a fairly mobile Christmas within the common travel area. Continental Europe is an entirely different thing because, of course, we've seen infection rates increasing sharply. There's huge concern about Omicron. We've seen very short-term quarantine introduced by Switzerland, tougher rules for testing for France. And so people really don't know kind of where they are in terms of getting in. And then when you are in, well, do you actually want to be there in places like the Netherlands, where you've got I think there's a launch going on behind me, actually. I'm sorry about the rumble, but very exciting. People are wondering whether they'll have a good time. The Netherlands, restaurants closing at 8 p.m. Lots of strict rules on what you can do and what you can't do. And then in Germany, well, they've cancelled the Christmas market. So, frankly, best Christmas market experience I can recommend is in lovely Birmingham, which is always welcoming.
I thought you were going to say lovely Belfast there, Simon, because, of course, we have a fabulous Christmas market in the grounds of City Hall there as well. But, I mean, you're right to mention the common travel area, because at the moment, as I understand it, if you're travelling from GB into the Republic of Ireland, you do need to have that lateral flow test, but it doesn't work the opposite way. And so the common travel, frankly, is not that common at the minute. Isn't that the case? No, sure. And it's always been quite complicated, but all the way through, certainly coming into GB from the Republic, no testing, no quarantine. But of course, you have to be absolutely clear what the rules are on the way out. I remember back in July, it was wonderful. The Republic of Ireland reopened to GB, and well, that was a great experience going out there. But of course, well, since then, we were thinking things were easing. We're thinking they were getting. Oh dear, have I lost Simon? Oh dear, I've lost Simon. I'm sorry that I've lost Simon, because it's always great to talk to him, and he did interrupt his trip to Florida to speak with us this afternoon, and I really do want to thank him for that. He's always really on the money when it comes to telling us how travel is going. But one of the UK's most senior counter-terrorism officers has told GBNews the public could prove vital in preventing another terrorist attack. Scotland Yard's Deputy Assistant Commissioner Matt Twist urged people to be extra vigilant in the run-up to Christmas, as the severe terror threat level means another attack is highly likely. GBNews Home and Security Editor Mark White was granted exclusive access to a counter-terrorism patrol in the capital.
We're on the road with a team from Scotland Yard's Specialist Operations Division, a counter-terrorism patrol in the heart of central London.
Stevie, if you know, we're going to go down that little side road by the Trocadero.
They've been tasked with patrolling parts of the West End, on the lookout for anything suspicious.
Well, it's just a case of the fact that we can get further with the vehicle. You might see different things when you're out on foot, when we're out on the vehicle, but it's a whole package.
The deployment includes foot patrols.
Hello guys, how you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks. You?
Good, thank you.
With the terror threat level recently raised to severe, these patrols have taken on added significance. There are also plainclothes covert teams here, reporting back anything that seems out of place.
So as project servitor officers, we deploy in unpredictable fashion into areas where there's quite high footfall. As I say, I can't go into specific details on how we work due to security reasons, but as you see, you'll see uniformed officers, but we do have a range of other assets available to us.
It was the terrorist killing of Conservative MP Sir David Amess, followed by the bomb attack outside Liverpool Women's Hospital, that prompted security officials to raise the terror threat level. And so across the country, in the run-up to Christmas in particular, the public are being urged to be extra vigilant.
I mean, this is the first Christmas in a couple of years where lots of people are going to be together. There's lots of big events going on, and we want people to go and enjoy them. But we also know that the terrorist threat level has been raised to severe after the two awful attacks we've seen, one in Essex and one in Liverpool. And we just want the public to be vigilant. We mean that severe means an attack is highly likely, but it doesn't mean they shouldn't go about carrying on their normal business. What it means is that if you're worried about something, if you're suspicious about something, then tell us about it. And the message is very clear. By phoning us, by telling us there's something that doesn't feel right, you're not going to ruin somebody's life, but you may just save some.
In Manchester, the Christmas markets are highly popular. After a hiatus because of COVID, there is added enthusiasm this year. But an awareness too that crowded places like these are potential targets for terrorists.
I feel safe, but then it's a midweek day, so people are more spaced out. I think I'd probably not feel as safe if it was a weekend and it was very crowded.
Definitely more vigilant. I tend to, I'm more aware of like baggage and things like that.
You've just got to crack on. You can't let these things slow you down.
Back in London's Leicester Square, another element of these patrols is about raising public awareness of the potential threats.
We're part of a security team based on Metropolitan Police from Charing Cross Police Station. When you're out today, if you see anything that does look suspicious, no matter what it is, please give us a call.
Right across the UK, in mainly urban centres of population, there will be a noticeable increase in these police patrols. But authorities say, far from being alarmed, the public should be reassured by this enhanced security. With the terror threat level at severe, sadly, authorities know that it is only a matter of when, rather than if, there's another attack. And so the public, they say, have a potentially vital role in spotting anything that might prevent another tragedy. Mark White, GB News.
So that's a package there from our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, just looking at what is going on in anti-terrorism at this moment in time. So heating bills are rocketing up and there's an acute gas price crisis. Yet in the midst of all of that, oil giant Shell has withdrawn from a project to drill an oil field off the Shetland Islands, following pressure from green activists. The decision plunges the entire future of oil exploration in the area into doubt, and could be a major blow to the local economy, leaving Britain even more heavily reliant on oil imports from countries such as Saudi Arabia and Russia. And amidst all of this, the Scottish Government Minister and Scottish Greens leader, Patrick Harvey, has claimed that now only the hard right support new oil and gas extraction in the North Sea. Well, joining me now to discuss this further is Scottish Conservative Shadow Secretary for Net Zero, Energy and Transport, Liam Kerr. Liam, good afternoon. And firstly, what do you make of the leader of the Scottish Greens comments this morning?
Good afternoon, Arlene. And that was actually a very good summary, if I may say so, of the situation we find ourselves in. But the comments by this member of the Scottish Government this morning are absolutely staggering. I mean, first of all, he effectively was cheering job losses, particularly here in the northeast of Scotland, and cheering something which actually hurts our net zero targets. But really, the core of what you've just set up there is he branded supporters of the oil and gas industry, and indeed workers within the oil and gas industry, as the hard right. And I'm afraid that is hugely insulting to the industry and to our workers. And the First Minister really needs to get a grip of her ministers as soon as possible and just disown these comments.
And you've mentioned, Liam, the jobs, and if I'm right, the prediction was around 1,000 jobs for this new oil field. So, I mean, what's the plan for those people? I mean, where do they get jobs?
Well, it's 1,000 direct jobs. Some were suggesting there might be about 2,500 indirect jobs connected with the Campbell field. Now, this actually plays to a wider issue. There are about 100,000 jobs connected with the oil and gas industry in Scotland, about 60,000 of those in the northeast of Scotland, where I am, where I represent. And really, what we have to understand here is that when you have the likes of Patrick Harvey, this government minister, and indeed Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister, constantly putting out a very negative narrative around the oil and gas industry, that goes towards how much people might want to invest in the industry going forward. It also breeds uncertainty for companies wanting to make long-term planning decisions. It also impacts how much our young people might want to go into this industry. But the key point here is that this is an industry which knows that we need to move to renewables. Indeed, I was out at BP this morning talking to them about the work that they're doing to transition in a fair and a managed way from fossil fuels into renewables. And I know that this is something that a number of the oil and gas companies are doing. Now, we can either choose to support that process and ensure that those workers who you referred to are part of that transition and remain in employment, or you can do what I'm afraid the First Minister has tried to do, which is effectively throw the oil and gas industry and 100,000 workers under a bus.
Can I just say in relation to that, Liam, and I'll pick you up on that other point on transition in a moment, but surely after COP26, being in Glasgow and moving towards net zero, this is the kind of thing that your government in Scotland wants to focus on, to actually move to a net zero scenario without oil and gas, and to move to a situation where you're reliant on renewables. Is that not something that everybody agrees with in Scotland?
Well, yes, everybody, including the oil and gas industry, understands that we need to transition to net zero and away from fossil fuels and more to renewables. But there's a key point here, Arlene, which is that demand is projected to still be about half of what it is today in the UK in 2050. That's the Climate Change Committee who have said that. And so we need to appreciate, and it's the point you made right at the start, if I may say so, we either satisfy that demand locally, or we import the oil and gas that we need from places like Russia or Qatar, which have different and I would say less rigorous regulatory regimes. Imported LNG from Qatar has double the carbon footprint of that we take out of the North Sea. But also, if we're importing more of the oil and gas that we need, that will have an impact on prices to consumers, with all the negative consequences that you identified at the head of this programme. So we have to follow the science here, and we have to understand that the benefit to the climate, the benefit to the transition for both jobs and indeed in terms of getting to renewables, and the benefit to consumers is best served by continuing to take oil and gas from the North Sea.
Yeah. Look, Liam, I wish we had more time because I'd like to talk to you about nuclear and all of those other issues, but I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to chat again about these issues because they're not going away, and the cost of living is very much something that our viewers want us to talk about. So thanks for joining me this afternoon. But not for the first time, UK-French relations are strained. French President Emmanuel Macron has refused to deny branding Boris Johnson a clown, and the Home Secretary has accused French authorities of allowing Channel migrants to make dangerous crossings. Meanwhile, the race for the French presidency has also geared up a notch, with firebrand journalist Eric Zemmour formally announcing his bid for the presidency after outflanking Marine Le Pen on the right. And joining me now to discuss this from Paris is journalist Anne-Elisabeth Moutet. And Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us. What is your view of what's going on in France at the moment? We've had some announcements from Eric Zemmour. We've heard that Michel Barnier isn't in the frame any longer for the race. What's going on?
What's going on is that what looked like an extremely boring repeat of the last presidential election has suddenly become very interesting, because everybody who had expected to be there, starting with Marine Le Pen, is now sort of being threatened by other sides. It's very interesting what happened with Michel Barnier. Michel Barnier was vying with 5 other candidates to become the anointed candidate of the Conservative right, the French equivalent of the Tory party, if you will. And he started campaigning within the party, saying the exact opposite that what he told the British during his 5 years as Brexit negotiator. He said suddenly that circulation of people within the European Union was not a good thing. He spoke against immigration. He spoke about sovereignty and against the European Court of Justice. And essentially, the Républicain Party voters decided that this was a man who was capable of making one U-turn just to get elected, and he could make other U-turns if he actually got to power, and they booted him out. And what's interesting is that the Républicain who came first in that campaign is the most radical of them, the one who's closest to Éric Zemmour, the new maverick extreme right candidate. And actually, the other favorite, Xavier Bertrand, is also out because people felt that he was wishy-washy. What it shows is that France is turning more conservative, and that there's a desire within the country to see a fight between Emmanuel Macron and someone who says different things, and not a sort of copy carbon of what Macron has been saying for 5 years.
It appears that Macron is desperate to pick a fight with the Prime Minister here in the United Kingdom. I mean, we've had a range of issues, but the latest is unclown. I mean, this is incredible stuff, is it not?
Well, that was, to give him credit, that was actually a private conversation. It was divulged on Wednesday by the French equivalent of Private Eye, Le Canard Enchaîné, which is very well informed politically. Nobody denies that Macron said that. They didn't even try. But essentially what happens is that in addition to the fact that Macron has been leading Europe against the sort of the pushback against Brexit, he takes it personally, which is a very strange thing. That Europe feels that Britain wanting to leave is a blow is perfectly understandable, but it was France that was much more radical than say, Germany or the Dutch.
Sorry, we're going to have to finish there because we're right up against it, but thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you, and I'll see you next week on The Briefing.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello, this weekend is looking fairly changeable, quite a chilly feel to things, especially in the wind, and there will be some rain for many of us. But having said that, it does look like an improving picture into Sunday. Now, for the rest of today, we have these bands of rain just skirting southern counties of England. So those will bring showery outbreaks of rain, quite a lot of cloud, some drizzle or more persistent rain at times here. Meanwhile, another weather front waiting in the wings, and this will bring a mixture of clearer skies, but also some heavy and quite frequent showers. And those could turn a little bit wintry over the higher ground of the north. So all in all, there will be quite a lot of rain around through this evening and overnight, and a lot of cloud. That will help keep temperatures up somewhat, so not falling too low. We could just see a touch of frost where skies clear later in the night across more western parts of the country. But for Saturday, quite a cloudy start for many. There will be some breaks in the cloud, allowing a little sunshine to break through here and there. And we have some more persistent rain. Again, this could turn wintry, particularly over higher ground in the north, maybe occasionally to lower levels, but it's unlikely to settle. What we will notice about the feel of the weather tomorrow is how cold it will be in comparison with today, particularly in that brisk northwesterly wind, which will really take the edge off the temperatures. Now, we do see further outbreaks of showery rain through Saturday evening and overnight, but it continues to track its way eastward. Still a good deal of cloud around, so again, not a particularly cold night for many of us, although with clearer skies in the north and west, there will be some frost here come Sunday morning. And for Sunday itself, as I mentioned, it is generally an improving picture. We will still see further blustery showers across more eastern areas, but drier and brighter skies developing elsewhere. And into next week, it turns unsettled again with some windy conditions on Tuesday.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part